Welcome to the Maverick Paradox Podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. But today, our guest is Simon Broome, who's a transformational leader and coach. How are you doing, Simon?
I'm very well, Judith, and thank you for inviting me today.
Cool. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I kind of had a quick look at the sort of stuff that you do, and I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about why it's so important to have authenticity and truth in an environment that needs to be transformational.
I think over the years of leading transformational change, both the private and public sectors, I've learnt that authentic leadership is absolutely critical if a transformation is actually going to happen. Even more so, I think, as the world around us becomes more complex and more volatile. As technology, new entrants and sophisticated consumers make it hard for a business to stand out.
So what do you mean by authenticity? Because people say that word so many times, I feel it's a bit overused.
In a leadership concept, I think it's about being aligned with the aims and goals of the organisation to transform the way it operates. Being self-aware, understanding yourself and how you build relationships with others so that you can manage yourself through this and help manage others through the challenges and risks that are associated with transformation. About resilience, I think it's important for a leader to have the capacity to adapt and grow as you go through the transformation of change. And that requires personal resilience, emotional resilience to navigate your way through it and help others navigate their way through it. And finally, I think authenticity revolves around the nature of the dialogue you have with the people in the organisation and how well you engage people in the truth of the story that drives the need for the organisation to change and their role in making that happen.
Okay, thank you. So truth is kind of a fuzzy idea for some people. So within an organisation, what would you say truth is? And is it dangerous for an organisation to be truthful?
In a transformational context, I think the organisational truth is critical to discover at the outset. As I said earlier, the pressures, the complexity, the ambiguity and the uncertainty that surrounds many organisations at the moment requires an honest appraisal of where they are and how they're delivering their product and service and how competitive they actually are in the market. That then leads you to a conclusion as to what needs to happen, what really needs to happen in the organisation to transform. And it is equivalent of flying a plane and changing the engines in midair. That is a really difficult thing to do, and that there's both an art and a science to it. It requires total honesty up front about the reality and the situation that the organisation is facing. It requires rigour in planning and delivery, and above all else, it requires informed, engaged, active people in the organisation making it happen, and therefore understanding the organisational truth at the outset. What's really happening here? What do we have to do, and how do we change the way we deliver, which effectively means, our business model is probably obsolete and we need a different business model. That needs to be identified up front and talked about. Find the truth, speak it with your organisation, and then you've got a chance of living it as you affect the transformation.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think about the organisations that I have met over the years, and I found that the most senior people can struggle the most with letting people know what the truth of the organisation is. especially when it comes around where change is going to require redundancies and stuff like that. So how do you put the senior people at ease when you walk into the organisation and say you're going to have to be truthful?
But I think there are two aspects to finding the truth early. One is what is the organisation truth, as we just talked about, but I think there's also the personal truth that flows from that organisational truth. What does this actually mean for me? What is my role in making this happen, and how can I take control of my own destiny and make informed choices and be resilient as I go? There's no doubt that pulling off a large-scale organisational transformation is not easy. It's not something that is to be taken lightly. It isn't like incremental change. You have to completely disrupt your model and rebuild it in a different form. That requires a brutal honesty, both in terms of what that means for the organisation, but also what it means for me. And the most successful transformations are the ones that truly understand that having a proper conversation with everybody in the organisation about the reality of it and engaging them in the process of making it happen is the only way to effectively, properly transform your capabilities. So it does require a change in mindset, I think, for many leaders. It's not about control and hierarchy and status and power. It's more about engagement, reaching out, helping the workforce to understand and be informed and make choices about how they can enable a transformation to happen. It doesn't happen top down, it happens from the bottom up. It requires a different approach to leadership, and that is the focus, I think, of an early focus for many organizations that should be taken. How do you help your leaders go through the process of understanding themselves and perhaps in many cases changing the way they operate with their team.
I think that's really interesting because I think socialised mavericks tend to want the truth at all costs. In fact, they fight really hard to find the truth and then translate that truth in a way that other people can understand and accept. And they tend to leave an organisation when they can't find the truth or can't get the people to actually demonstrate truth moving onwards. So it sounds to me like a socialised maverick is a natural fit for the type of things that you're talking about there.
Having looked at the profile of a social maverick, I see a lot of parallels and alignment in the way that I've just described the role of a leader in a transformation environment. It requires resolve and humility in equal measure. Resolve to truly transform, but the humility to realise that it isn't all driven from me. I enable other people to do this and make the choices they have to make on the basis of the truth, the reality of the situation. And if you ask many people, they'll say, I'd rather be told the truth and made to cry than continue to be told a lie that makes me smile. You're storing up problems if you do not face the reality of what a transformation actually means up front, and therefore design your change journey and organise your resources to deliver based upon that fundamental truth that is the reality your organisation faces.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, socialised mavericks is all about the truth and all about making sure that people will face that. And their reputation is really important, and they have a reputation for being honest and truthful and having integrity, which is why they don't always fit into organisations that don't demonstrate similar values or aren't willing to change. So when you go into an organisation, how do you what are the steps for transformational change?
In the leadership context, I think there are, I've got a 7-step process actually that I try to follow. As we've said already, the first step is to discover the truth about the change context and the realities that the organisation faces. I think the next step is to create, an honest, inspiring change story. So getting the leaders together to actually craft the change story based upon those realities and what the journey for change will actually look like, so that the whole organisation can hear that truth and participate in a dialogue about it. I think there's some work you then do to help leaders connect and align behind that change story, so that they can start to understand what it means for them and get them ready to engage the people from a position of authenticity, both in terms of the content of the story and the way that I'm telling that story, having worked it through myself in terms of what it means for me. To help that process, I think it's also important to raise a leader's awareness about themselves and the way they interact with others, so that they can understand and manage their own sort of emotional reaction to the change that's happening, and also recognise and influence the emotional reaction of those that are looking to them for support, care and direction. I think, as I said earlier, looking after their physical and mental well-being is equally important. So focusing on how the brain works under stress, so that they can manage themselves and adapt and grow as the challenges and the risks associated with transformation start coming towards them. Transformation is a complex, multi-step, long-term process. It doesn't happen overnight, and therefore the resilience to keep working and bouncing back when things don't work is really important. So focusing on resilience is really important. Effectively helping leaders to become storytellers and building their influencing skills is also important, so that they can build understanding and commitment in the workforce and take people with them as the journey unfolds. And finally, helping leaders to innovate and foster innovation in their teams, so that the journey is accelerated, is really important as well. So there's sort of 7 or so focal points that I'm looking at as we go in, to understand where the leadership are and where collectively and individually we need to work with them to help them either craft the story or be at their best to tell, engage and influence the workforce.
Okay, that sounds like quite a process. Is that something that takes a long time to do?
The earlier you start
it, the better. At a short measure?
Clearly, there'll be a lot of strategizing and planning going on in terms of what needs to change and how it's going to change, and what the operating model of the future looks like, and where the capabilities will be located, and what does this mean for our property footprint and our people footprint and our technology plans and so on and so forth. In parallel, it is important to start this conversation with your leadership community, so that they're starting to build the capacity and capability as the transformation is taking shape. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't transform the way somebody looks at themselves in one conversation. It takes time, effort, and investment, and often requires a range of tools and partners to help you do it as you go through the process. So it's a structured process, but it does take time.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that interested me is you talk about the need for the leaders to be storytellers. It interests me because in my own process, I have, one of the steps is narration, and that is, telling the story. How do you help people to be storytellers? It's
a mixture of content and style, I think. Familiarizing yourself with the content and aligning behind that story is really important. When the going gets tough, good storytelling leaders fall back on their belief that it is the right thing to do. So there's a very strong sense of what is this story, what's the content of it, and how well aligned am I to it, and how much do I believe in this. And you've got choices. I have, in certain situations, as you go through the process, seen people make the choice to move on at that point because they realise that either they're not aligned, or they're a square peg in a round hole, or this is something that they just don't want to do, and they move on. Others grow into it. Others are already doing it. So there's a big thing about message, content, alignment, belief, etc. Then I think the other aspect is my influencing style and how confident I am in being able to talk about and articulate a message in a way that is accessible, simple, and understandable for everybody in the organisation. But also, I think getting people over the challenge, which is a common issue for leaders, that it's okay not to have all the answers. You don't have to know everything before you start a dialogue with the workforce. In fact, it's probably dangerous to try and know everything before you start a dialogue with your team members, because actually they know the real situation and the answer. The art form in doing this is to create and facilitate a dialogue that enables the answer to emerge from the collective knowledge and experience across the organisation. And therefore it's about the humility aspect. There's fierce resolve required to transform, but there's also enormous humility required to understand that you don't have all the answers, and actually your role is to facilitate the answers coming out from the rest of the workforce. So then it's about not only helping people build their style of influencing, but also the approach they take and the mindset they go into it, which is, I'm seeking answers here. I'm not giving the answer.
Okay, I know what you mean. I remember working in an organisation, and one of the directors asked me something, and I said, "Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I need to speak to so and so." And he said, "But you're in charge of this department. You said, you're supposed to know what's going on." And I said, "I do know what's going on. I don't know the detail of that particular area because I've delegated it." And he couldn't understand why that was important. And I was having to explain, I know exactly I know what tasks they're doing. They know at what point to contact me. They have a reason, I can trust them to the level of responsibility. And I realised at that point that they didn't really have a good delegation style. So when they delegated stuff, they delegated everything, and they were not aware. So they were thinking everybody else was the same. And I had to sort of explain, it is bad for me to know everything, but I do need to know that the people, the managers that work under me, know at what point, they need to come back and ask or check. And so, my job is to grow more leaders, not for me to do every single thing myself, because,
totally,
I'm not hired to do
absolutely,
that part of the work.
In the context of a transformation,
is that something you see a lot?
It's impossible to operate that way because it is so complex. There are so many steps along the way, and it takes time. You have to involve everybody in the process from a position of the reality of the situation, the organisational truth again, so that the whole workforce can work their way through. How do we make this happen? It isn't going to be, a transformation isn't going to be delivered by the force and ego of one leader. It's enabled by a leader creating the environment for the organisation to change itself, which requires, letting go of control and trusting that the organisation will do the right thing, and embrace the change. Almost, you're building a new set of capabilities. The art form is in trusting the organisational system to pull those changes into the new model, in a way that builds sustainable delivery. You can't tell an organisation to transform. You have to enable an organisation to transform, and therefore the leadership style has to be about facilitating the organisation doing it to itself. You know what,
I think you had a key point there.
Yes,
is that you can't make an organisation transform.
That brings us right.
Decide.
That brings us right back to the starting point of what is authentic leadership. I think.
Sorry.
The ability to, or the capacity to articulate a clear rationale for change and a plan and a journey to get there. The trust in others in the organisation to actually deliver it, but operating in a way that is self-aware and resilient and engaging. If you are aware, resilient, and engaging in the way that you approach it, you will be a transformational leader. You will inspire, you will influence, you will innovate, and you will support.
I think that's a fantastic place to stop, actually. Thank you very much, Simon, for coming along. That was an interesting conversation. Will you come back again? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox Podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Simon as much as I enjoyed having it. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, Apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group. My website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.